You never forget the moment when the people you raised choose comfort over compassion. I was holding my husband's trembling hand, watching the monitor beep slower and slower. His breathing was shallow. He needed help, fast. My own hands shook as I dialed the only family we had left, our son and his wife. I prayed they'd answer with love, urgency, maybe even panic. But when my daughter-in-law picked up, her voice was flat. Cold. I'll never forget her words. "We're on vacation. Don't call unless he's dead." The silence that followed was louder than any scream. That night, I sat alone beside the love of my life in the ICU, wondering how we raised a man who could let this happen. I wiped my husband's brow and swallowed tears. They thought I was weak, disposable. But that phone call? That was the moment I started planning everything. They left me alone. But they would never forget what came next. I remember the sound of George's breathing that night, shallow, uneven, like the wheeze of an old accordion losing air. I sat by his bedside, my hand wrapped around his, watching the heart monitor flicker like it was dancing on the edge of something final. I knew something was terribly wrong. His skin was clammy. His words were slow, mumbled. I didn't panic, I couldn't afford to. Instead, I reached for the phone and called the only people who should have cared as much as I did. Our son. And his wife. I dialed twice. No answer. The third time, she picked up. I didn't even get a hello, just a tired, flat voice saying, "We're on vacation. Don't call unless he's dead." That was it. No, how bad is it? No, should we come home? Just silence after that venomous line, like I was bothering her with an inconvenience. I sat there stunned, staring at the phone in my hand as if it had insulted me directly. George coughed in his sleep, his chest rattling with every breath, and I realized I was alone. Truly, devastatingly alone. I didn't cry, not then. I stood up, found the nurse, and we got George admitted. Hours passed, machines beeped, doctors rushed in and out, but my son never called. Not once. No text, no message. My daughter-in-law, that cold-blooded girl I once welcomed into our home with open arms, had made it very clear where I stood in their lives. George had worked his fingers to the bone for that boy. Paid for his college, bought him his first car, helped him buy his first house. And now? Now we were discarded, forgotten, like dusty furniture left behind in an attic no one visits anymore. The nurse, a sweet girl named Alyssa, brought me a coffee the next morning. She sat with me a while and asked if I needed anything. I wanted to scream, to sob into her arms, but I just smiled and said, "Thank you." She held my hand and told me I was strong. I didn't feel it. It was 2 days before they bothered to check in. 2 days. I answered the call, my voice already drained of warmth. My son, sounding like he just woke up from a nap on some sunny beach, said, "Hey Mom, everything okay?" I wanted to throw the phone through the window. I wanted to reach through it and shake him, scream, "No, it's not okay. Your father could have died while you were sipping piña coladas." But I didn't. I told him George was stable. He let out a soft phew, like it was all just a minor inconvenience that passed. He didn't even ask to speak to his father. My daughter-in-law didn't even get on the line. I hung up without saying goodbye. That night, I sat beside George and watched the moonlight drip through the hospital blinds like soft silver tears. I looked at the man I'd built a life with for 56 years, his pale face, the familiar slope of his nose, the way his hand instinctively curled around mine in his sleep, and I knew I had reached a breaking point. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was humiliated, dismissed, treated like some obsolete relic who should be grateful just to exist on the fringes of their shiny, curated lives. And that's when the switch flipped. That's when grief gave way to resolve. I took out the old leather notebook George kept in the drawer at home, the one he used to jot down estate plans, insurance contacts, numbers. I opened a blank page and started writing, line by line, everything I would change. If they didn't want to be there when it mattered most, then they didn't deserve to be written into the future. I wasn't just cutting them out of the will. I was cutting them out of the legacy they believed belonged to them. I would watch them scramble, clueless, entitled, arrogant. And then I would watch their faces fall when they realized what they lost, because of that one cold, cruel phone call. I looked down at George and whispered, "I'm going to make this right. For both of us." He stirred slightly and squeezed my hand. That was all the permission I needed. That night in the hospital stretched longer than anything I'd lived through in my 80 years. I sat beside my husband, watching his chest rise and fall, praying that each breath wouldn't be his last. Machines beeped softly, the nurse occasionally checked his IV, and outside the window, the world kept turning, while mine was falling apart. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I just sat there, clutching his hand. Waiting. My phone remained silent. No messages. No calls. Not even a half-hearted check-in. I stared at the screen more times than I can count, expecting a little ping, a glimmer of concern. But nothing came. The next morning, a young nurse brought me a cup of coffee. She looked at me kindly and asked if someone would be coming to relieve me soon. I shook my head and forced a smile. She didn't press. But the pity in her eyes was hard to ignore. I was alone, and everyone knew it. Later that day, I finally gave in and called again. Maybe, just maybe, they'd come to their senses. But this time, no one even picked up. Straight to voicemail. I left a message, voice trembling, saying that their father had taken a turn. That we didn't know how long he had. That I needed them. I waited another hour. And then I stopped waiting. Instead, I got up, wiped my eyes, and made my way to the hospital chapel. I sat in the back pew and stared at the flickering candlelight. My knees ached, my heart ached more, but in that stillness, I made a quiet decision. They weren't coming. And I didn't need them to. By late afternoon, my husband had stabilized. The worst had passed for now. The doctor said he was lucky. I said nothing. I went home that evening, exhausted. The house felt bigger than usual. Colder. I shuffled into the kitchen, fed the dog, and sat down at the table with a cup of tea. My phone was still silent. I walked into our bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and opened the drawer beside me. Inside, tucked behind an old pair of reading glasses, were the documents we had signed only a year ago, our living will, our financial power of attorney, and the trust papers. My husband and I had set up a trust for our son. He was our only child. The trust was generous. Over $2 million in property, investments, and cash. We had always believed he'd take care of us, or at the very least, show us some respect. Now, staring at the thick envelope, I realized something bitter and clear. Love without loyalty is a hollow thing. And entitlement without responsibility is dangerous. They thought we were weak. That we'd always be here, that we owed them something. But I still had my mind. My name was still on everything. And I wasn't going to leave behind a legacy for someone who treated us like a burden. The next morning, I made a few calls. The first was to the estate lawyer. The second was to a financial advisor. And the third, well, that one I didn't make right away. That one I saved for later. Because revenge, I've learned, is best served not just cold, but carefully. While they were tanning on a beach somewhere, sipping drinks and laughing, I was redrawing the blueprint of their future. And this time, they wouldn't see it coming. A few days later, my husband was discharged. We returned home quietly, with no fanfare, no flowers, no welcome back. Just the sound of our keys turning in the lock and the weight of everything unspoken settling in with us. He was weak but grateful to be back in his own bed. I helped him into his recliner, made his favorite soup, and sat with him, both of us exhausted, but alive. Still no word from our son. Not even a "how's dad?" Just photos from their trip posted online, smiling faces, champagne glasses, matching swimsuits, and golden beaches. As if we didn't exist. As if nothing had happened. But something had happened. I saw the truth, plain and sharp. The boy I raised, the man I sacrificed for, had become someone I no longer recognized. And his wife? She had always been cold to me, but now I saw something worse. Disdain. She'd always thought of me as baggage. A relic. A responsibility they didn't want. They had their lives planned out. And we didn't fit in them. So I made sure they wouldn't fit in ours either. With the lawyer's help, I quietly amended our trust. The name of our beneficiary changed. The terms were revised. We structured everything in a way that would ensure our legacy stayed protected, but far out of their reach. Instead, we redirected it to someone who had shown us more love in a month than they had in years, a kind-hearted niece of mine who had visited during my husband's stay and brought homemade soup and fresh socks. She sat with me while he slept and offered nothing but kindness. That's who we wanted to bless when we were gone. Not people who saw us as a burden. After everything was finalized, I felt lighter. Freer. But I wasn't finished. One evening, after my husband had gone to bed, I sat in the living room with the lights low and made one last phone call, this time to my son. He picked up on the third ring. "Hey," he said, casual as ever. "We just got back. I was going to call you tomorrow." I took a breath. He almost died. There was silence. I continued, calm but firm. "And you told me not to call unless he was dead. I just wanted you to know, I heard you. Loud and clear." He stammered, tried to backtrack, said they'd had poor reception, they didn't know how serious it was, they thought I was overreacting. I let him speak. And then I told him the truth. "We've changed the will. Everything has been reassigned. You'll receive nothing from us. Nothing but memories, and even those are starting to fade." He exploded, accused me of being dramatic, emotional, irrational. And I said, "No, son. I'm being logical. I'm finally seeing things clearly. I raised you to be better. But if this is who you are, then I refuse to reward it." I hung up before he could say anything else. For the first time in a long while, I slept peacefully. Because sometimes doing the hard thing is the most loving thing, not just for ourselves, but for the memory of who we were, and the dignity of who we still are. The days after that call passed quietly. My husband was healing, and I did everything I could to keep his spirits up. He still didn't know what had been said to me during those terrifying hours at the hospital, and I didn't tell him. Not yet. He didn't need more stress. His recovery was slow, and I focused on his comfort. We played soft jazz in the mornings, watched old movies in the evenings, and I cooked meals from scratch, even though I was tired to the bone. Tired, but determined. One morning, I was sipping coffee in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. I opened the door and there they stood, my son and his wife, sun-kissed from their trip, dressed in designer casuals like they just walked out of a catalog. No flowers. No food. Just empty hands and forced smiles. "We came to check on Dad," my son said. I raised an eyebrow. "After how long?" 2 weeks. He stepped in like nothing happened, while his wife barely looked at me. I watched her eyes scan the house, not with warmth or worry, but as if she were inspecting a property she thought she'd one day own. I followed them into the living room where my husband was dozing. When he woke and saw them, his eyes lit up. I didn't ruin the moment. He needed it. But I watched them both, watched how they smiled and played the part of loving family. It was a show. And I was the audience. But not for long. Later that evening, while my husband napped again, my son pulled me aside in the hallway. "Mom," he said, his tone shifting into something colder. "You shouldn't have told us not to come. We would have returned if we knew it was that serious." I stared at him. "I begged you to come. And your wife told me not to call unless he was dead." He flinched, but then tried to laugh it off. "She was just stressed, you know how vacations are. You really need to stop taking things so personally." That's when I realized something. He didn't feel guilt. He felt inconvenience. I smiled, not kindly, but calmly. "I already told you, I've seen your true colors. We've changed the inheritance. You two won't see a penny." That hit him harder than anything I'd said before. He scoffed, but his eyes widened just enough to show the panic. "You're being spiteful." "No," I replied. "I'm being smart. I'm done rewarding cruelty with kindness." His wife appeared behind him, clearly overhearing. "Fine," she said, her voice sharp and full of venom. "If you want to die bitter and alone, go ahead." I stepped forward, just inches from her. "If I'm alone, it's because I chose to cut off the rot. I'd rather live in peace than die in pretense." They didn't stay the night. They left with stiff goodbyes and not a single glance back at my husband, who remained asleep, unaware of the storm that had just passed through the house. I closed the door behind them and stood in the hallway for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just breathed. Because for the first time, I wasn't afraid of losing them. They had already lost me. And they didn't even realize the value of what they had thrown away. Weeks passed, and peace returned to our home. My husband recovered slowly but steadily, and though he often asked when our son and his wife would visit again, I'd gently shift the conversation. I couldn't burden him with the truth, not while he was still healing. But I wasn't hiding it forever. Just delaying the hurt. In those quiet days, I finally did something I'd put off for years. I went to our family lawyer and revised every line of our estate plans. The house, the investments, the bonds, all removed from my son's name. The new beneficiaries? A local shelter for single mothers. A scholarship fund for underprivileged kids. And a portion set aside for the kind neighbor who brought me groceries when I couldn't leave the hospital. People who showed compassion without being asked. I didn't do it out of revenge. I did it because I finally saw clearly. What's the point of building a legacy if the people you leave it to have no respect for the foundation it stands on? One afternoon, I got a message from my daughter-in-law. A single line, "We're stopping by this weekend." No apology. No acknowledgement of what they'd done. Just an expectation. I set out 2 teacups and waited. When they arrived, they had that same shallow cheerfulness, gifts in hand, laughter on their lips. My son hugged his father and then turned to me with a wide grin, glad to see everything back to normal. Normal? I smiled too. Funny you say that. I slid the updated documents across the table, sealed copies, notarized, final. "What's this?" he asked, slowly opening them. "My thank you note," I said calmly. "For showing me the truth when I needed it most." His eyes darted across the lines. His wife leaned over his shoulder, and within seconds her face drained of color. "You removed us from everything?" "Yes. I realized I don't owe loyalty to blood if there's no love behind it." My son's voice cracked. "We're your family." "You were. But family doesn't abandon each other in crisis. Family doesn't call from the beach and say, 'Don't call unless he's dead.'" The silence between us was louder than any storm. His wife stood, furious. "You'll regret this. You'll die alone." I stood too. "No, dear. I'll live peacefully. There's a difference." They left, slamming the door behind them. And that was the last time I saw them together. Now, every morning I sip my coffee on the porch, watching the sun rise, listening to my husband breathe softly from the living room. I don't have millions to my name anymore, not in the bank anyway, but I feel richer than ever. Because I gave that money meaning. I gave it to people who care. People who wouldn't ask, "Is he dead yet?" I no longer chase love that doesn't want to stay. I no longer shrink myself for people who think kindness is weakness. Let them have their vacations. I've got my dignity. And I'll never apologize for that.